Welcome back. Alright, so we're on to the third one of these guys, and just going to try to jump into it, get these things going a little bit faster, a little bit shorter. So this third time around, again, kind of assuming that you saw the first two 3D primers. If you didn't catch them live, they're up on YouTube. This time we're going to be looking at UV mapping and the Hypershade editor in Maya, basically everything involved with getting a texture onto your model. So we're going to start here by making our handy dandy cube. Alright, so basically we're going to go over the understanding of what UV mapping is. You're basically taking a picture and projecting it onto your polygon faces and deciding how that information is distributed. And I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. So I've made my cube, and I actually have UV information already. So what's UV information? Let me go ahead and open up my UV editor here. So what's happening here is I basically have a 2D representation of my 3D object. You can see how this thing has been unfolded, and that's a little unclear. It's basically like if I took a razor blade and cut each edge of my cube and folded it out like this piece of paper right here. So that's pretty much what's happening. So you've unfolded it and you've laid it out on a table, and that's what's going on in your UV editor in a really simple way. So how does that work for textures? Basically what's happening is you're taking an image and saying I want a, let me go full here with this. If you have a picture behind this, if you want to think of it that way, I'm saying I want part of my picture here, part of my picture here, and you'll see it displayed on your image. So I'm going to go ahead and set something up real quick so you can see what I'm talking about, and then I'll break it down for you. So I'm going to go to my Hypershade editor. I put it up in my bar, but my shelf here, but you can find it in Windows, General Editors, oh, I'm sorry, rendering editors. So Window, General Rendering Editors, and Hypershade, and that's where it's hiding, in Window, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. And what that does, don't worry about all this other crazy stuff here. We're going to focus on Lambert. It'll just be right up in the front here. It's a default. So if you just click it once, you're going to make a new shader, and it's called a shader. All this is, it has a bunch of different attributes that talk about how the thing is going to be rendered pretty much and what sort of texture is on your model. And we're only going to worry about that aspect right now. We're going to worry about this one slot called color right here. So let me just go ahead and apply this, and I'll walk through all of it. Okay, I have my texture. Select my cube, assign, and then press 6 so I can see it. So I have my texture here. And now if I go back to my UV editor, you'll see that I have my texture set up and I can actually see it. You can toggle that on and off. There's a button up here. It's a little picture of a face, and that will toggle the texture on and off so you can kind of see what's happening. So I'm going to go smaller with this real quick. And there we go. So I have my layout overlaid on top of my texture. So I'm going to say, let's see, I want to move this away from his mouth. So I'm going to select the face, and you can see it moving on the cube here. So hopefully this sort of illustrates what's going on with the layout here. I'm saying I want, I actually want his eyes gone. I want it over there, and now this is going to be all skewed, but you kind of see what's happening. And you can see that it's gotten distorted because I've distorted my layout here a whole lot. So let's backtrack, and we'll walk through how we did this, and then I'll get into some actual UV editing tools. So if you want to apply a texture to your geo, whatever it is, you're going to go into Hypershade, and again that's Window, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. I created a button because it's something you use a lot, and that's just, I wanted something in my shelf so I could always access it. You can create a Lambert, which is clicking Lambert, that's it, and it'll make it pop up here. And you're going to double click it It should show up by default, but if it doesn't, that's all you do. And then in your attribute editor here, you're going to choose color. And there's a little checker box right here. You want to click that. And you get another set of options here. Don't worry about all this crazy stuff. All we want right now is file. That's all we care about. So choose file. Now you get another setup here. You're going to choose image name. Again, don't worry about any of this stuff. Let it fall away for now. Choose the little folder icon. And then you're going to browse for your texture. So I've got two things on my desktop. I'm going to desktop right now, and I have my Nick Cage texture right here. So I want to put that onto something. Just open, and there we go. Now you can see I've updated. The ball has updated here with a preview of the texture on it. You can change the size of this with these little spheres over here on the left. So you do that. You can kind of get a better idea, but I mean, I normally work kind of mid-range like this. So if I want to apply this texture, let me just do this real quick. So I have my gray box, and I want to apply my new texture. So with the Hypershade editor open, I select my object, and then over the texture, the shader that I want to apply, I hold right mouse button and just move up right here. It says assign material to selection. Highlight over that and let go, and it'll automatically assign it there. So that's how you apply a texture to your model. So if I don't like how this is looking, if I want Nick Cage's face in its full glory on every single face of this cube, then I'm going to need to do what's called UV mapping. And I can either do that some manual ways, I can do that automatically. There's a lot of different things that I can do. I will break down some of the basic ways to UV map right now. And that's if you go hold spacebar, go to create UVs, left click and hold. You have a couple options here. You have planar mapping, cylindrical mapping, spherical mapping, automatic mapping, create UVs based on camera. And those are pretty self-explanatory, I think, by their names, but I'll walk through them. So planar mapping, pretty obvious. It's just projecting a plane. You can see that the edges of my box have become smeared here, and I'll bring up my UV editor and show you why that happened. So again, if you think about it this way, I'm projecting an image straight down onto my model. So it doesn't really matter what other information is going on this horizontal here, or I suppose the vertical. All that's happening is I could have any model here. I could have a person, a model of a person, and just project straight down, and it would look fine looking straight above, but then the moment I rotate, I'd see this sort of issue here. So if I select my cube, you can see what's happening. I have just this one. Again, I'll go over this. You can see it looks like, oh, it's just the side of it. It's just one side of the box. But actually, if I go to UV mode and select a UV vert, you can see there's actually more information going on here. It's been ignored, essentially. I mean, it's still there in space, but it's just a, that was odd. There we go. It's just a planar projection, so everything is kind of skewed, and it's not really the way, like this doesn't look very good. But if I want to take an object, say I want to go into face mode, face, select it, I want Nick Cage's face right here. So I hold spacebar, go to create UVs, planar mapping, and I want to highlight this little clear box over here. If I do that and let up, I get this dialog box right here. It's my planar mapping options, and I can choose which axis my plane actually projects onto. So if I choose x-axis and click apply, you can see it automatically projects there. I could choose the others. We're going to get swoopy textures again, just like before. But if I choose the right axis, now I have properly UV'd his face onto each one. Or, well, onto this face, and I could do it again if I choose this face, create UVs, planar mapping. You can also keep this dialog box up if you're going to be walking through things, which I'll do for us here. So there's one. I'm going to choose Y to project up. You can see it stays. It doesn't matter what's going on. I can just I can choose each face, project individually. As long as I'm doing face, I'm only creating UVs for the selected face, not the rest of the model. So oops. There we go. X. Sometimes you forget what axis you're on. There we go. So through this method, through planar, I have UV'd my cube so that I have a nice clear picture properly set up on each face. So that's one way to do it using planar. Now I'm going to do cylindrical, and I'll show you how that works. It's essentially doing the same thing. By the way, if I load this up actually in my UV editor, it's going to look the same. It's going to look like one box, just like last time. But if I do this, move it away, you can see they're stacked on top of each other. So it's all creating, your UVs are always created in the 0 to 1 space. This being center being 0 and then 1 being all the way at the top of your grid. So I'll go ahead and turn this texture off. You can see I have these grid points here. Origin is 0 and 1 is all the way out. So always 0 to 1 space. So now I'll go create UVs. Again, spacebar, create UV, cylindrical mapping. And what's happened here is I've projected a cylinder around my cube. So that's why the image, if I deselect it, kind of gets stretched around it and repeats. And then the tops are blurred because I don't actually have a top UV applied here. So create UV, cylindrical mapping. I'll look in the UV editor here again. You can see what I've done here. The faces have been laid out as if it were a cylinder being unwrapped. Let me create a cylinder for you here and show you what I'm talking about. Again, each object, when you create it at its base, already has UVs built in. So you'll have proper UVs for what you've created every time you make a new model. But it's after you make edits to it and everything like that that you need to start UVing and fixing it. Otherwise, you're going to get a bunch of junk like this guy right here. But you can see with the cylinder unwrapped, if I select all the edges here, I can detach it, and it's been unwrapped like that. If I compare that to my cube, it's the same sort of thing. So that was the cylindrical unwrap. The other type, spacebar, create UVs. Spherical mapping, pretty much useless. Again, it gives you all sorts of distortion and weirdness. It's essentially doing the same projection kind of thing, but with a sphere. So you get some weird stuff with it. I don't really ever use it, but it's there if you want to try it. One more, create UVs. Automatic mapping. This one gets used a lot, especially when creating environment pieces, because there's a lot of right angles. It makes a lot of sense because what happens is it projects individually on each face. Well, not on each face, but on your model, however many axes you set. So create UVs, automatic mapping. I have mine set to 6 planes. So we have a 6-sided cube. If I hit apply, you can see it shows, here's what it's going to look like. It shows the 6 planes projecting onto it. So if I go ahead, I'm happy with that, go to object mode. I'm getting a similar result where everything is clear, but I don't have all of his face. And I'll show you what's happened here. So what happens with automatic mapping is it actually creates every piece that it projects onto is set up in its own space. So I'll move this around. You can see each face is their own individual face. So I don't have the same result as if I did a planar on this one plane or face here. So it's a way to do it, and I'll show you how you can fix those things in just a sec. So if you wanted to go a little faster, instead of doing planar on each face, you could use this and then clean it up after the fact, which I suppose we can do now. We can go to the UV editor and see it that way now that we've gone over our different types of creating UVs. Oh, the other type, one last one, is create UVs based on camera. And all that does is create UVs based on whatever you're looking at. So if I do that right now, I got Nick Cage's face based on my camera looking at it. If I rotate around, you can see it's real distorted. Because again, if I'm looking head on like this, and I do the same thing, create UVs based on camera, it looks a lot better. But it gets all stretched and weird. Except on the other side, because again, it makes sense because that plane is right behind it. So that's the idea of UV mapping using the basic UV mapping tools. You're simply telling your model, hey, I want the texture to show up on this plane in this way, or I want to unwrap my model in this way. So with that, we'll go ahead and do an automatic mapping that'll help us for the next step. So spacebar, create UVs, automatic mapping. Good enough. Object mode, hold right click, object mode. Select the cube, and then go into your UV editor. So now we have all these faces here. Let's spend some time in here. I'll go ahead and make this a little bigger. I'll put our cube over here. Boop, there we go. Alright, so we're in this UV editor. I'm going to go over all the weird movement stuff that I was doing before. When you're in here, you need to be in UV mode. So you hold right click and UV, and that's going to let you manipulate individual vertices of your model. So if I find that guy in my 3D view, sorry, it's a little weird because he's over there. Let me get rid of my grid too. So if I move that, you're going to see it get a little distorted. The reason that happens is because I no longer have a square face. Now on my model, I have a square face. That's just what the geo is like. So if I tell the UVs, nah, you're not square, you're actually triangular in shape, you can see that this part has now become completely stretched because that information is basically being left out. So I can completely invert it and get a weird mirror thing going on. You don't want to do this. This is a terrible way to UV. I'm just showing you that by manipulating each individual UV shell, is what they're called, through a single vertice, you are changing how the texture actually applies to that polygon. So if I bring this out, you can see it'll scrunch it, and I'll see some tiling, or I can stretch it out a whole lot. So that's what's happening. Now that I'm in UV mode, I can move these around. The same controls as in 3D work. It's W, E, and R. Will let you move, rotate, and scale. So if I select this guy, I can scale the entire thing. And you can see this face sees a lot more images over and over and over again. That's because, remember, the 0 to 1 space is where our texture shows up. That's how this is defined. However, this texture is actually repeating infinitely in all directions. So if I go outside of the 0 to 1 space, I'm just going to keep seeing that image over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So now I have my cube. I want his face on every face. I want the entire thing to be his face every time. And I want that for everyone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in my UV mode, I'm going to start moving these around and make them stack on top of each other, just like we did when it was planar. First, I'm going to go into face mode. So right click, face, and you can select an individual face, and you can move that around. And I'm going to do that for each, just to get them out of here, because I'll be working with them again in a second. So I'm going to go back into UV mode, right click UV. So remember I was saying I can move these around. It's just like in 3D, where if you hold V, you can snap to other vertices, or if you hold X, you'll snap to the grid. This is a nice tip for in 3D also. So if you hold X, you can see I'm snapping to the grid points here. There's other halfway grid points. You can set this value in a setting. So if I move down, I can snap this to the 0 point, and I can do this for all edges. And you can see now I'm starting to get some clarity in my cube over here. And there we go. So now I have his face completely on one side. The rest are all still kind of weird, but if we do the exact same thing for each one, hold X and move each vertice on top of it. Oops, let me grab that one. Now we're starting to see the same sort of result that we got from planar mapping by doing it per face. So I'm going to do that for each one. And now, get this last guy. There we go. Up in the 0 space, and 1. There. So we now have his beautiful, luscious locks on every single face of the cube here. And that was by manipulating the UVs. So now that we've kind of gone into what UVs are, I'm going to go into the UV editor and break down the tools, which is kind of the meat of what I wanted to get to here. We only got 10 minutes, been trying to make it faster, but some of these things are a little more complex to get through. So I'm going to go ahead and start going through some of these tools here. So if you select a UV of your piece, just any shell, like the faces we were working with, if you select a UV and you hold right click and you go to select shell, that's going to select all the UVs that are associated with that one shell. And remember the G key will repeat the last action. So I can do that again, and I can move all of my shells back out. There we go. So by doing that, imagine you have something a little more complex. You can select a object that has a lot more faces going on, and you can select one vertice if it's got a bunch of things and it's hard to select all of it because there's a bunch of other UVs around or something like that. You can just select one vert, right click, select shell, and that'll just grab the whole thing. The other thing you can do is weld vertices to each other. So if you hold V, just like in 3D, you can drag them to each other. So they'll weld to each other. And the reason you'll want to do this is, let's say I've got, let me get back out of this. Let's say I have two models. Oop. There we go. Face. I'm going to get rid of these faces because I want to weld them together. Face. There we go. And I've welded their verts together. This is holding V, just connecting them. I can select them both, spacebar, mesh, combine. Now they take up the same space of the same object. Their vertices aren't connected though, still. But we've gone over this before. We'll select them, we'll weld them together. Now they are. So I've got this, and I want my texture to go across this one face. I want Nick Cage's face to be across these two polygons right here. So they're going to take up the same space because I duplicated the object. So the UVs for both these objects are the same. Even after I've combined them, they take up the same space. So if I select face and move one, you can see I actually have two there. So now what I can do, since I have these two pieces here, I can select my UV, hold V, there we go, snap them together. Now if I select them both, hold right click, go to polygons, merge UVs. That's just like welding vertices together. So now my UVs are connected. So if I just click one, it's going to move them around. So now we're in something a little more complex. We actually have a piece here. Oh, and I went to my plugin by default. Here, I'll go away from that. So now I have UVs that a little different. You can see his face a little stretched on the left side, so I'll move that out. There, now it's a little better. So I can select both and scale them down together. So if I select one UV right here, and then select shell, you can see it selects the entire thing because they've been welded together. Now they're part of the same thing. So I can scale them down, put them in the space that I want, and now this one more complex model shares the exact same texture. Awesome. Let's see, so now that I've selected these, let's say that I have moved things and I made a mistake and I've got a vertice that's all the way over here and another one that's over here, and it's just all kind of jacked and it looks really gross like that. There's an easy way to get the stuff aligned back with each other, and it's called aligning. So if I select this UV and I think I want this one to be even with this one, I know that if I move this out here, it's going to be closer to being correct. So if you select both, up top here, I'll make this a little bit larger. Up top, there are these icons of these three verts here with an arrow. So, and they're pointing in different directions. And they're aligning selected UVs to minimum U value, minimum V value, all that sort of stuff. Maximum U value, all that. So what that's doing is saying, out of these two, I want to align these verts with the one furthest away. So that's this guy right here. So if I click that, you can see it aligns it. So now I'm in the same predicament with these guys. I want these two higher up because I know it's going to look correct if they're at that height. And I know this guy's at the right height. So all I do is select them and then use the up arrow. There we go. So now I know those are in the right spot. I got one more issue here where I know I've made all right angles. This angle does not exist. It's if I move it manually, it's about like that, right? But I want it to be perfect. So I select those, and again, I do my align, and I do to the left. There we go. And which aligned this UV to this one right here. And so now it's back to normal. It's back how it should be, and everything looks nice and clean. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't drive too long with this. I don't want to get too complicated. It's already a lot to chew on, I know. So I want to try to keep it short and sweet. The last simple tool I guess I should mention is the mirror tool. Again, your tools are up here at the top, and that's this guy right here. There's flip selected UVs in U direction, flip selected UVs in V direction. So all that does when you click it, if you look to the left here, it'll flip. Well, right now it flips all the UVs. If I select my UVs that I want to flip, it'll only flip those, and you can see that he's looking side to side now. And if I flip it again, he's upside down, right side up. That's all that's happening. I'll move this and this so you can kind of see it happening in the UV area. Flip horizontal and flip vertical. There's also these rotate tools that'll rotate in increments of 45, things like that. Just mess around with all the tools that are up here. There's all these nice little things. So just to burn through it again real quick, you have your basic UV editing tools, spacebar, create UVs, planar mapping. You can assign a certain plane to project down on. It's affecting all the polys on your model unless you select the specific faces that you want to do it to. So if I do create UVs, planar mapping now, it only does it to those faces, and the rest of my UVs are left alone. When I look at my UV editor, you can see that these guys have been made again in a way that matches my planar map, and everything else has been left alone. Everything's the same. If I go spacebar, create UVs, cylindrical mapping, that wraps a cylinder around it and stretches my image around it as if a cylinder is taking your image, wrapping it around a pole. Think of it like that. Even if it's a shape that isn't a pole shape, it just does that the best that it can. Create UVs, spacebar, create UVs, spherical mapping, kind of useless, don't use it. Automatic mapping, used a lot. That projects evenly on all surfaces of whatever you have selected. So you can do it on just your object in object mode. Say, I've got this cube, I need it to be mapped real quick. Create UVs, automatic mapping. And now it's mapped. Now I go back into my UV editor, and everything's laid out nice and neat for me again to work with. Turn this off so you can see it all. Or I can just go back. There we go. I just can do, say I want to do these three faces right here. Create UVs, automatic mapping. And now I've done that same projection. You can see everything else has been left alone though. That's our cylindrical mapping from before. And just these three polys that I've selected have been automatically mapped. And then last but not least, create UVs based on camera. Do the entire thing. He's projected from wherever my camera is placed. I can do it again, G key. Does it there. Do it again, G key. And again. Oop, lost it. Create UVs. Create UVs based on camera. So it just does that from wherever your camera is facing. And again, you can do this with I want to just do it with these two faces, create these based on camera, and it only does it to those two faces. So that's an important tool. I use that a lot when I'm making some kind of rubble or something. If I break some rock and I just have a broken edge of concrete that I need to map, I'll select the whole thing, rotate my camera right on it, and then create based on camera, and that does the entire thing. I don't have to do any weird plane stuff or weird things to try and make it work. And then we go into the UV editor, and we have the basic tools. You want to right click, hold UV, let up, and that'll let you manipulate individual UVs. WER lets you move, rotate, and scale. So I can select all of it, right click, select shell. We'll select all the polygons associated with that shell. So that was, remember, we did our camera mapping, so these guys are technically part of the same shell here. If I selected faces that weren't connected to each other and did create based on camera, they would be individual shells because they're not connected in any way in 3D space. I could weld them together by using the weld tool, UV, select, hold V to snap to verts, select those, polygons, merge UVs, and now if I select one, you can see, oh, my bad, sorry, they don't actually connect together because they aren't in the same in 3D space. My fault. Silly me, getting ahead of myself. Other than that, if you select your UVs, you have your mirror tool, left, right, up, down, rotate 45 degrees in either direction, clockwise, counterclockwise. You have your align to the furthest UV tools at the top, so I can select those, align the top, those, I want to align to the bottom. Those are the tools that get used the most, basically, are the mirror and the alignment tools and welding. So that's, again, very basic view at UV editing. I know it's a lot to chew on, so feel free to ask questions. You can ask me after the 3D primer. You can ask me in the stream. I'm glad and happy to answer. If you're watching on YouTube, ask in the comments. I will answer best I can. These videos are really just meant to be a quick, you've never looked at this stuff before. You just want to get an idea of what to do. And the more intricate tools, the more intricate methods, everything like that, left up to you. You know, go find other tutorials, go find websites, other materials, ask me personally. We can totally dive in deeper. I'm happy to do that. This is just meant for people who have absolutely no idea what they're doing in a program right now. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, I understand it's a lot to chew on. There's a lot of jumping around between windows. This is a much more complicated 3D primer. So we may cover it again in a later one. But anyway, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for stopping by to watch it live, or thank you for watching it on YouTube. You can catch these live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you do that, you can join the chat and you can ask questions and I will answer live, and we'll go over those things live, so it's sort of like a class and other people can maybe get a question they were wondering answered as well. So thank you, and talk to you next time.